Hello and welcome to Wait, It Gets Better, the Improvisational Storytelling Podcast, where we bring you interesting ideas and you bring us likes and subscribes and thumbs up and attaboys. I'm, of course, Levi.
I'm Reed.
And we are here to continue a story. So we are continuing on our story. Sans Seth tonight, but that's okay. We won't hold it against him.
Like sans. What is that? Is that a what language is that from? Like
I don't have any idea, Reed. I feel like
sometimes I really like a hamburger sans cheese, but almost always I get a cheeseburger. But sometimes I just feel like having it sans cheese. Well, like where does that come from? What language? Where is the notion of sans? What?
Yeah. Wait, It Gets Better is now a language podcast.
Yeah. Did we?
I think it's kind of like 86th.
86th. Yeah.
You know?
Okay. Yeah. Or like going 19.
Yeah, exactly. No Seth tonight. We're continuing on City, State, Private Eye, which is the name of our story.
Okay.
Reed, do you want to give a little bit of a rundown, or should I?
Let me get a crack at it.
Okay.
What we've got here is Levi had government type, and he was explaining we're in kind of a post-apocalyptic period. It had been previously a kind of a post-scarcity society. The world had kind of gotten itself together. There was enough food production. There was enough like breakthroughs had been made for energy, transportation. There wasn't anybody with a lot of want. There was not a lot of poverty-driven crime. It was like people would have a place to stay. They have transportation. They have enough food to eat, and pretty good. But then there was probably some kind of environmental crisis. There was a societal collapse, and the broader network of society kind of broke down and kind of devolved into kind of independent city-states.
Right.
Where, local people, fought against the chaos and reestablished order. And as you might guess, there'd be a broad spectrum of how individual city-states were organized, but local. There was one of the things that tended to happen, though, the order kind of broke down outside of the cities. There wasn't much of any notion of society that was keeping things under control out in the countryside. And there was a kind of a class of civil servant that rose up, kind of the road repairman. And it's sort of like half road warrior, half construction crewman kind of a guy. And they were busy out there keeping the roadways so that there could be commerce between city-states. And they had pretty advanced road-making techniques, but, like anything, after time, it's going to break down and going to need repairs and whatnot. So there was that kind of structure, I guess, as far as the government type. Seth brought up his element was hero, and he introduced Ron, who was kind of a wandering private investigator / bounty hunter type. He traveled easily between city-states. He got along kind of with everybody. One of the things that made things work for him is he had kind of a hard and fast system of ethics. He's not a kind of a guy you would want to bring, try to extort or try to bring bribery to influence, him in any way. That wasn't his gig.
Right.
He had a hard kind of a sense of honor. His word was his bond. He expected, people to treat him with respect. And if that happened, he treated them with respect back. And he normally was a thoughtful kind of guy, would think things out. But he had this kind of pulse on the way things are going. There's one detail that we're looking at this since the collapse. We're about 50 years post-collapse, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Last time my story element was villain's sidekick, and Lucius was he appeared to be a man kind of without emotions. He seemed to be laid back, almost disinterested. And when challenged about hey, you're not listening to me, he would just parrot back what you had said word for word, going back several steps in the conversation. So it was he was a pretty hard guy to read. And he was surprising. He's kind of seemingly bored, kind of disengaged kind of person would suddenly just explode your face with his enormous kind of fist, with his gnarled knuckles, with kind of lightning quick kind of ferocity.
Right.
All kind of with a hard, cold, kind of passionless, detached. He's kind of focused and smart, extremely violent when it suits his purposes. But he's not somebody that, is a rageaholic, or he doesn't enjoy hurting people. It's just business. He's kind of into racketeering, vice, gambling, prostitution, kind of bribery and extortion, protection rackets. That's kind of his
Right.
deal.
Right.
And, he's kind of been looking for, he's a man that examines his own limitations. He knows, he can inspire some loyalty, but he's not the kind of a guy that's going to be able to rule kind of a vast network. So he's kind of been looking on the lookout for somebody that kind of pull things together, and he can carve out for himself a nice little profitable niche, his kind of corner of the world, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that was kind of the main pieces. Then we had Levi introduced a kind of a villain character, which was kind of fit the bill for Lucius. Kind of a swindler, trick of the game kind of a guy, huckster, definitely seeking to build power, kind of a power base between cities. Sort of looking to be the guy that fills that power vacuum of connectedness again. And so that...
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add to that is that the city-states have different types of governments. Right. So some of them, there's a king, some of them it's kind of like a straight democracy. Some of them, they have councils of elders. Some of them attempt to, battle it out in sort of forums. You can't really, there's warlords and people who exist in the wilderness. So there's no totalitarian. And the other thing is that these repairmen, more and more, just as a bit of world lore, cities have been going silent.
Yeah.
Right? And so these repairmen are not only going out to maintain the cities, the roads, but they're also sort of the really risky ones are like, okay, now we haven't heard from, Sky Peak in 2 years. So the roadmen will just kind of travel along the road, fixing things as they can until they find and repair the road. And a lot of times they'll find another group of roadmen working the opposite direction, and the connection will be made.
And that's good news.
Yeah, the fiber connections will be reintegrated, and then all of a sudden it's back on the map. But sometimes they'll find the city burning, or they'll find the city gone, which is the weirdest part.
Or warring warlord factions, or
right.
chaos.
Right. So it's one of those things where it's incredibly safe. If you have the passport, it's incredibly safe inside the city.
Right.
But almost all the cities close their gates at night, and I'm thinking of not like a sprawling city. I'm thinking of like a walled city.
Right.
So just a couple of square miles of space with enough sort of fortifications and things to have a wall and defend it, sort of thing.
Yeah, now that we're like 50 years in, it's no longer like rings of used tires and chain link.
Right.
Out in the desert, right?
Right, because we have like nanobots embedded into the concrete that like fix it as it breaks and stuff like that.
Right.
So what was your story element, Reed?
Mine is magic system. Great.
Mine is something based on a book I'm reading. So I want to hear yours first, and then I've got a wild idea for something. Because, anyways, go.
Okay, now, as magic systems go, the more advanced a society gets, the tendency is to find scientific explanations for what had heretofore been thought of as magic.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
Those kinds of things. So we're going to kind of skirt that line again here. What I'm going to call the magic system is the enhanced sensory capacity, and particularly, the five senses: sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. And it's not distributed among the population in general. It's probably as much as 2 to 3%, kind of on a continuum.
Okay.
Which means we're like out of 100 people, there'll be probably 3 people out of 100 that will notice some enhanced sensory capacity, and then at about between 2 and 3%, it's really not that big a deal, really. It's pretty normal, but just enhanced, and particularly shows up in sight, sense of sight and sense of hearing. The taste and touch, interestingly, like a lot of times people who are drawn to culinary pursuits, have this enhanced sense of taste, and that's really helpful. And touch, if you're cooking a steak and you can just tell by feel how done it is,
right,
things
right.
like that. The taste and touch would be kind of down on the spectrum as far as really much of a contribution to society. But then when you're getting up more to like 1 out of 500 is when you're getting more and more sense. That's when it becomes remarkable. And it seems to be mutation, kind of a mutation, perhaps, number of theories about it, but physiologically based. there's centers of the brain will show increased activity, and
Right.
when you can find a machine that's still working, to measure such things. But you know what I'm talking about? Like it wouldn't surprise me, for example, that Ron, if he had enhanced sight and hearing,
Right. Right.
And then you get farther, like 1 out of 500, that like half of 1%. Then you get farther in, like 1 out of 10,000 would be the point where it seemed truly magical. And 1 in 10 of those would have 2 or more of the senses. So like if you've got a couple things going on, like I was thinking maybe Ron might, you would have that. Now like Lucius, I'm going to get to him. He has I think the villain, the did we name him?
No, we didn't.
I'm just calling him Swindler. He probably had early on noticed a remarkably enhanced sense of hearing. And not only could he hear really acutely, his brain had the capacity to separate sounds in a crowded noise environment. For example, he could sit in a bar and listen in on a conversation halfway across the room. And for his purposes, it was really good to keep that quiet because it's, for a surveillance technique, right? I mean,
right.
But anyway, there's the where I want to go with where it becomes truly something we would think of as a magic system. But 1 in 500,000, so 2 in them out of a million, what we would call sixth sensors. These are literally, and there's literally physiologically a separate gland that works with and in partnership with the adrenal system. And these people call themselves, sometimes they're called time sliders. And what it is, like the fight flight mechanism, like especially enhanced in prey animals like deer and rabbits.
Right.
They are acutely aware of sensorially hearing, smell, sight, possible predator activity.
Right.
Adrenaline shoots through the system, fight, flight, and they're just, it's just a survival instinct, right? Well, imagine having that kind of adrenal system and you were a time slider, which meant your brain had the capacity to operate out just slightly outside of time. So your fight, flight, adrenal system would be triggered prior to the event. Like, you just instinctively slide time, especially the more alert you were, the more likely you would be to pick up on cues, signals like that guy's drawing a knife out of his sleeve. And like and then a time slider would have almost that ability. Like I think about like the Flash or like Spider-Man, when the bully is kind of beating him up and everything is in slow motion for him. And like he sees the fist coming at his face and he just slides out of the way and the guy bangs his fist into the locker.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking of, kind of that a sixth. It's very closely related as far as brain activity to these enhanced sensory capacity, but it's literally like a sixth sense, and I call them, kind of you can slide time, which is this is something that Lucius has tried to cover up, but it's why he is so explosive in a fight, why he's so lightning quick, because he looks like kind of a big lumbering guy, the big ham-fisted kind of guy, but all of a sudden your lights are punched out and you hardly even know what happens. But and this is a kind of a thing. It appears to have, the onset is, we're only a couple generations in here. And they're, like the current generation it's much more prevalent among the current generation than it was among their parents. And prior to the collapse, it was almost unheard of. There were, it wasn't even enough to have really much, nobody was writing papers about it or, you know what I'm saying?
Right. It was almost pseudoscience.
Right. And then, of course, there's differences between city-states. There are some areas that are just seemingly unaffected, don't have these kind of capacities, and others, perhaps there are environmental conditions, I don't know, but where this kind of stuff is more prevalent. But it makes for some really interesting possibilities where you get kind of especially a kind of a confluence of these special gifts. Can you imagine? I'm thinking about Wheel of Time. Perrin is a wolf brother, and when he has like enhanced capacity, sense of smell. Like that was the thing. Besides being a time slider, I kind of thought of Lucius as his key enhanced normal sense is smell, and he can smell fear. He can smell anxiety, and and then of course he is prone to exploit any advantage like that. And like a bully, like they say, dogs can smell fear. Well, like it seems like bullies can too,
Yeah. I was thinking, so if we look at the genetic realities of human beings and how certain traits express themselves more under certain conditions,
Right.
Call it evolution if you want, whatever. If we were to take that and say some conditions, like there was a reason why we needed this,
Right.
because it did exist before, but now it's existing to an even greater degree, and there might be some reason why.
Right. Like, for example, a physical gland, like parallel with your adrenal glands. A literal, you can like biopsy and say, this adrenal gland doesn't look right. Wait a minute. There is a separate gland next to it with its entire separate network of ducting. And it seems to, function as part of the adrenal system, but it's literally this, it only occurs in these people that have this time slider capacity.
Right. Okay. So this is great. And you did say that people who have this time slider, they also have sort of can have enhanced other things.
Right. It's a smaller group, that has two or more things going on. But yes, it's very common for the time sliders to also be regularly enhanced sensory.
Well, I think someone that the hero talks to or sort of consults with is a debunked fortune teller.
Oh, yeah.
Right? She used to be kind of a famous storm watcher.
Right.
Or, like what was Nynaeve supposed to be?
Wisdom. Yeah.
A storm watcher.
Yeah.
You remember that? Like specifically, she's supposed to be able to hear the storms,
Yeah, there was a term for it, wind.
Regardless.
Yeah.
And she basically is one of these time sliders, and they would use this ability to sense when something that would hurt or destroy the city would be coming, sandstorm,
Right.
hurricane, whatever. And they could essentially give an early warning sign for the people. And she was one of those. And now she's debunked. And now she runs a sort of seedy underground. She's a fortune teller, right?
Right.
And most of it is con, right? Most of it is trickery. Most of it is manipulation, right? But whenever Ron comes to her, she always gets these things. It's like a combination of this time slider thing. It's like this weird thing she's been able to mix together of like, so Ron's in the city and she like consumes all of this information, all these camera feeds, all of these data feeds from all of these things to basically open up her awareness to something really broad, and then gets a key bit of information like Ron wants to know where this person is. And so then she keeps the person's name and picture hidden and then consumes all of this extra data.
Right.
And then reveals the picture to herself. And it allows her to basically game her own sensory system to confirm or deny if that person is here.
Oh, cool.
Right. And so typically she just does, fortune telling and stuff like that. But she also can find people.
Right.
And she knows Ron, she's done work for him or he's done work for her or whatever. I feel like that would be an interesting sort of human being to have as part of his repertoire of people to go to and talk to because, she's kind of like this.
Yeah, that's an interesting character. I like it.
Yeah, I think that the story should center around a sort of Las Vegas style city.
Yeah.
Right? And the villain's kind of ethos is like it was a con that brought down the world.
Right.
And it's going to be a con that brings it down again. And only those on the inside are going to be able to come out of it.
The key is to be in the know.
Right. And so he is kind of this person who is trying to hedge his bets in every direction, but he's got a million tricks happening at once. He's got all these things he's doing, he's got all of these. And I think that at first he should be like the head. We don't really know him as the villain quite yet, but he's like the head of this city. He's like the spokesperson of this city. And his whole thing is Lady Luck and try your chance. And, he's a con man will look you in the face and you will feel like he's being completely honest with you while he's robbing you.
Right.
And
I'm thinking of Vegas type space. My first thought was like, these time sliders are not a happy thought for the management. I mean, if you can just stand there and look at the roulette wheel and know what's going to come up and then place your bet, that'd be
right.
Yeah.
Right. So something based on a book you're reading. That's what I had for and I've been reading John Milton's Paradise Lost. So here's what I'm proposing, Reed, and you can tell me if this is ridiculous. This is the time before the flood in the Bible.
Cool.
Right? So
Yeah.
all of society has been built up. I don't know how many thousands of years it is between Adam and Eve leaving the garden and the flood.
Right.
But who knows? Who knows
Yeah.
the size and breadth of technology
Yeah.
that was wiped out?
Building pyramids with gigantic stones,
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah.
Right?
Perfectly square and level. Yeah.
Yeah, who knows? So that's what I'm proposing, that this is the time before the flood. And the story is going to end with the birth of Noah,
That makes sense.
right? Which will basically, because how I imagine that it happened in my brain, my storyteller brain, who has also read the Bible, is that society built up to a crazy amount, but
Right.
quickly fell apart and quickly sort of descended into chaos. So what we see is a post-scarcity society that has now turned the corner. I'm making a motion with my hand, which our viewers can't listen to. I mean, our listeners can't see, and then now we're on the downward spiral. Right? The downward pitch as we try desperately to hold together. And this guy, this Las Vegas, this con man knows that something is happening. So maybe it's not. Maybe the story ends at the beginning of the flood, right?
Right.
So he knows that something is happening, right? It took them 200 years to build the
I think it was, I don't remember. I thought it was, I had in my mind it was 100.
Yeah. Well, that would be even better because, this thing has been going on for
Like 50 years, you
Yeah.
said originally.
So maybe whatever started 120 years. So maybe we're 50 years into it, right? Something crazy happened, right? When Noah was given the task, something insane happened, like the world, something crazy happened. And it was this giant countdown. And now the people of the world are trying to save themselves from a calamity that they know is happening while also decrying and mocking this person. But we never mention who he is. Right?
Yeah.
It's just, there's a crazy lunatic out beyond the mountains, right?
Right.
And he is he's a crazy scientist. He's working on some terrifying project with his family, right? You can't get there.
Right.
Right? It's we're trying to get there to see what he's going to do, how he's going to, some say it's a weather machine that's going to fix the environment. Some say it's going to erase. Some say it's a giant weapon. It's like this huge mystery. And that is what Ron is going to be tasked with going to see and stop if he can, right?
Right.
The thing is that I want to here's me talking about something silly. I want to maintain the canon of scripture.
Okay.
Right? In that Noah is not going to have any allies from the world.
Right.
Right? Ron, while he's a good man, will die at the end or before the end of this story. The woman who helps him, this fortune teller of CD character, who is a good person, wants to be a good moral person, will die at some point before the end, right? There will be he got on the bus too,
Right.
So the story centers around this old world area, and there's this separation, and just the world is continuing to get worse. And what I think the spirit of the motivation of the world is, I need to get mine before it's too late.
That sounds great.
Right?
Yeah.
And that the villain is just loving it.
Right. That's
right.
Yeah.
This is his thing, right? He's loving it. And then opposed to him is Ron, who is trying to figure this stuff out, And at first he's just like, I'm a guy, I'm taking a job, But as he sort of learns more about the world, not the world, but as he learns more about who this sort of head Vegas style tweed coat, not tweed coat, pinstripe coat wearing mafia boss kind of guy is, it's like, okay, maybe not,
I'm thinking there's like a subculture that's kind of like the Ferengi from Star Trek, mergers and acquisitions. I mean, like putting together the deal,
Yeah. So that is my story element. There's a lot of interesting things that could happen with that.
Yeah.
Like angels coming down and doing terrible and crazy things, but I kind of like, while that's the backdrop for the story, I'd kind of like to keep it in a sort of still kind of a sci-fi post-apocalyptic sort of thing,
right?
Because we don't know if a flood of that magnitude actually happened. Any reality of what was on the earth before would be gone,
right?
Unless you had, there's a possibility that something like the pyramids could survive something of that magnitude. But and in that, this we could have it that the con man is himself the what's it called? Not the architect, but he's the one who commissioned the pyramids to be built.
Oh yeah.
As a way to save himself, as a way to sort of survive. So that's my story element. I like yours. I have this kind of vision that the story starts with Ron on his way to a city. We talked about last week that he's not really like a worker. He's not a road warrior, a road construction worker, but he will travel with them in order to like protect them from wild beasts or, raving bands of lunatics or whatever, as they sort of put this polymer down and build the road. But the whole theme of this, I really want to be, the great sin is, I will take my fate in my hands, and my strength is enough to take my fate in my hands, and in some cases that's correct. Like Ron takes his fate in his hands and his strength is enough. But for other people, you quickly see stacks of debtors, stacks of loan sharks. Loan sharks are really aggressive to get the money from you because they owe money up the chain. Life is one great big pyramid scheme, right? I don't know. If you think it's silly and not able to happen, speak now, because if not, I'm going with it.
Sounds great. There aren't nearly enough stories written about pre-flood society.
Yeah. So I have the vision that the story starts with Ron sort of going through, like traveling with the repairmen who are fixing the roads as they make their way to a city and find it empty, and Ron was there to find someone, to do he had a job to find someone in the city, and he goes there and he can't find them. And it's just like it reiterates the fact that the world is very old, but it's also very young. Like things are different all the time, and then sort of makes his way back to the main Vegas city. I keep calling it Vegas just because I just have this idea of just like neon lights and casinos and showgirls and drinking on the sidewalk and Pinocchio, the town, the fun carnival they went to, which is just like overwhelming stimulation.
Right.
That's kind of the vision I had. And then he sort of makes his way, through the drab into the sort of rundown slums and finds Matilda and basically says, and she is like, he walks in and they both say no such luck or something at the same time. And he looks at her and her eyes are, like all bugged out. And, she's like clearly had an episode, and they sort of talk briefly and you get some lore dumps about like how the power works and stuff like that. And then he goes home and then a car comes and picks him up and it's Lester. Nope.
Lucius,
who's going to bring him to the big office, and so you get introduced to Lucius and who he is, and then you meet the man, the big man,
the swindler character.
Yeah, and he sort of he plays up this picture of hopelessness, of nothing you can do but trust in yourself and all these type of things, and contracts with Ron. And Ron is difficult for him because Ron isn't someone he hasn't been able to nail him down, but he contracts with Ron to go over the mountains and basically through the wilderness, to find out what this scientist is working on this project over the mountain, and the mountains are incredibly treacherous to pass, but it's said that there are trees over the mountain and there haven't been trees, for years. not since the calamity. And so he kind of has to, maybe it's a quest thing where he gets a ragtag group of companions and then travels over the mountains and then sees him working on this project, this boat. It doesn't look like a boat yet. I mean, it's only 50 years in, so it just looks like a skeleton, like a giant skeleton of a thing. And he is looking at it and it's really difficult. And then he gets confronted with, by Methuselah, or he gets confronted by, because Methuselah was his father, right? Grandfather.
If you look at the timeline, he was the oldest living, but he died in the flood. Methuselah died didn't he?
Right. Yeah. So, maybe he meets Methuselah and he's told like not to go any farther. Like this is as far as you're going to go, and there's some conversation about it, and I don't know. I don't know exactly how it will go. And maybe that's for next week to figure out, but that's kind of my rough idea. Ron kind of goes into it like this is just another job, but then comes out of it saying, oh, things are much more than what I thought they were, and then makes it back, so maybe it's more than 50 years, right? Maybe if the story is going to, pause. We have one more week. We can figure this out in one more week. I feel like let's add some more stuff. I love this. I'm really glad that you're feeling good about it because I was
really enjoying this.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Wait, It Gets Better. If you like this beginning, middle episode, let us know. Send us an email at waititgetsbettercast@gmail.com or add us on Twitter at @getsbettercast. If you have any ideas, comments, suggestions, feel free to tell us. We're happy to listen to them. If we talk weird and you want us to talk different, we'll look at it. If you have cool ideas for stories, I love those. And I'd be happy to credit you or have you on or whatever you want. But we will see you guys next week for the next version of the story. Bye. Cut.